My name's Kendra Fraka. I've been here, this will be my 18th year in August, working at Children's Health Council. And I work with all age of children and families. So I'm really excited to be here and talking about teens because we've had a lot of expansion in our teen program here at CHC in the last few years. How many of you have been to a workshop at Children's Health Council before? Okay. Anybody who's never heard of Children's Health Council, or this is your first time here, well, welcome. Thank you. We're kind of a good kept secret sometimes. A lot of people still haven't heard about us, but we've been providing services for 65 years. This is our 65-year anniversary. And our focus is really to help build skills, both academic, social, and helping in the community as well. So we've really been trying to remove the barriers in the community to accessing mental health and educational services. And one of our ways that we do this is by providing these community educations for parents and teachers. Again, we're talking about the different aspects that we like to focus on for effective learning to create resilient, happy teens and children. And here we specialize in ADHD, learning differences, autism, anxiety, and depression. We have 4 divisions: our clinical services division, our community connections, our Sandhills School, which works primarily with kids with dyslexia, and then our Esther B. Clark School, which has a campus in Palo Alto and in San Jose. And again, there's more information in the handouts. There's also at the back table more handouts if you're looking for more resources about CHC or other resources in the community. EdRev, has anybody been to EdRev before? No? So this is a really, really cool opportunity. It's free to the public. It's at AT&T Park. And it has a variety of presenters and exhibits. Some of them that I think are really cool is the technology piece, where you can go and try different applications and different types of software to help with learning differences. 1 in 5 is the current stat for people that have kids that have either attention challenges, anxiety, or depression. And often that goes undiagnosed. So we're really seeing an increase in challenges for kids, and one of the things that we're recognizing is that the resources and the availability for this isn't quite there yet, and people don't recognize the prevalence of it. And so when we talk about challenges with kids, often one of the factors is a learning difference. This is a new logo that we have because we've been doing a lot of work with kind of our disenfranchised kids that have either gay, lesbian, transgender issues, and so we're letting them know that this is a safe place for them to come and talk about those issues as well, and same for families. Our agenda today, we're going to talk about teen development and behavior, stress and problem solving, communication strategies, modeling healthy behaviors, and limit setting. So the part that you're going to want probably the most is the limit setting and the strategies. But the other part's important too. So we're going to go through it fairly quickly, like I said. But if there are questions you have as I go through it, please let me know. So more than hormones. You hear all the time that, oh, they're just hormonal or they've reached puberty. And I am kind of curious. So of our group here, how many of you have middle school students? And how many of you have high school? Okay, so we have a little bit of both. You middle school families have probably already started to see some of these changes, right? I joke I have a 6-year-old daughter and I feel like she's hitting puberty now. But the physical changes that you see are often the pimples or kind of the smelly bodies, things like that kids are going through. And one of the other factors is the unfinished cognitive development. And I think that many people already know this, but it's something just to remind everyone of, that the teen brain is still developing into the 20s. And so when we talk about, well, my kid can do this in this setting, but they can't do this here, or they feel like they know it all, but then they still want me to be their mommy, there's kind of this paradoxical effect that you have in their development that they're still learning and problem solving. And then the stress associated with accomplishing the many developmental tasks, which we'll talk more about. So again, we talked about growth spurts, hormonal changes. I find the THP very interesting. It's something that in adults reduces anxiety, and in kids it is anxiety producing. And so this is something that they have shown studies that this is a factor with kids. And then melatonin, which is something that helps you sleep, its dose is reached lower in teens, and so they actually go to bed later and get up later as well, which is not what we want them to be doing, right? Brain development, not an adult brain with fewer miles on it. So if you look at gray matter and MRI studies with teens, you'll see that as they get older, they get less and less gray matter, and it becomes more and more dense. But as children are developing, they have more gray matter in that area. And so we're looking at, again, kind of the cognitive changes that are going on, and you can see it scientifically in some of the MRIs. We talked about the paradoxical development, that it's not uniform, so teens will appear mature in one area but lagging in another. And I think you often see this happen really quickly physically, where you'll see kids that look so old, and then you talk to them and you realize they're very naive or still immature in a lot of other areas. Again, about the cognitive development, they're still developing their abstract thinking, their reasoning to consider multiple possibilities, their perspective taking, and thinking about their thoughts. I love the example that somebody gave about kids that are able to argue or debate, right? And so you think, wow, this is a really mature kid, they're able to do this, but they're arguing and debating about something that seems really illogical, whether it's more gaming time or staying up later or things that you would think, you're not supposed to be doing this, but they can create the best argument for it because, again, they're still having these gaps in kind of their logic and reasoning and their ability to communicate. So the primary developmental task of adolescence is to gain autonomy or independence from parents, to build a social network, and to develop an identity. In the work that I do here with the teens that I work with, it's one of the things that always kind of breaks my heart when I'm working with them, because you'll ask, what makes you a good friend? What's something that you think you value in other friends? And a lot of times, they don't have that identity piece yet. And so if they do have it, it might be, well, I'm a good soccer player, or I'm a good volleyball player, or I'm a good student. And then for the kids who are struggling in those areas, they identify more with, I'm not those things. And so trying to really figure out what their strengths are and how to encourage them in developing confidence in those areas as well. Autonomy from parents. So we have kids that say, stop treating me like a baby, I can do it myself. This is where my 6-year-old comes in. It's age appropriate to test limits, feelings of confusion and ambivalence. So at this point, when we say, my kid's talking back to me or they're doing this, part of this is typical in development. So it doesn't mean that we want them to be disrespectful to us, but it's helping parents know that this is normal development, to start to become more independent and to challenge some of those rules and limits. Building a social network, opinions of friends, not parents, become paramount. Yeah. Friends give a sense of belonging, acceptance, and understanding, or at least we hope they do, right? And peer pressure to act out, to conform, and navigating romantic relationships. I'm always surprised how younger and younger we're seeing more of the teen drama with relationships, about who likes who. And I think that we'll talk more about social media, but social media is a big factor in that as well, and how that impacts our kids and how we can help with some of those challenging behaviors. Developing an identity. Who am I? What do I believe? Why am I unique? What makes me me? Sexual orientation, fitting in, and maintaining individuality. Have any of you done the sex ed talk over at Stanford? And I'm sorry, tell me the name of it. I'm forgetting it right now. Heart to Heart. So yes, you've done it as well? Mm-hmm. Good. But I think those are really great opportunities. Do you remember what the minimum age is for them to go to that? Is it 12?
The minimum age?
Mm-hmm. 10 for young boys.
9,
10
okay.
for boys. And at least 10 for girls.
Yeah.
I just went to one 2 weeks ago.
Yeah. So again, I think those are things that as parents, we don't really think we're ready for those conversations. And yet we're seeing that kids are developing sooner, that they're having these questions, they're talking about it with their friends, and they're not always getting the right information about their bodies or sex or any of those things. And so it's really helpful when you can go with them and talk about it, even though it's that uncomfortable moment. They don't want you there. It's like, Mom, do I have to do this, or Dad? But it really does help open up the doors to those conversations. So what does it look like? In vignette number 1, Gina's a 15-year-old sophomore. She found out through Instagram that her 2 closest friends have been hanging out with her on Sunday nights. Gina's parents have imposed a curfew and she's not allowed out past 8 on school nights. Her friends do not have a curfew. Gina is hurt and feels left out. These girls have been her friends since 1st grade. She writes in her journal that she feels like she's drifting away from her friends. She snaps at her parents and contemplates sneaking out. So when we talk about those developmental kind of stages that she's going through. What stands out for you in this?
Too early of a curfew for a sophomore, that's what stands out to me.
And how would that impact her in those developmental areas? So social's paramount, right? Testing limits, the last part where she says she's thinking about sneaking out. So maybe in the past she wouldn't do that, right? And now it's kind of like my friends are more important than my family. I'm missing out. I always joke about the fear of missing out syndrome, right? Like they're all doing this and I don't get to do it. And how many people have said, well, in our family, we do it this way, so I don't care what so-and-so's family does, right? Marcel, 16, finds that he has less and less to talk about with his football team friends. He does not have an interest in drinking at parties and finds the hookup culture of the football team uncomfortable. It's funny when I read this because my first thought was, that's kind of stereotypical, isn't it? That they would say that about football players. Why didn't they make it a girl or somebody different? But if you look at it in more of the general thing, I think that high school, there are the peer pressures of hooking up, of drinking, of drugs, all of those things. And so the identity of if I stand up to my friends, if I have strong moral values and I don't do this, but everybody else is doing that, where's my identity in that? Where's my connection to other peers that are doing those things? Or people that I like, but I might not be, I realize I don't respect them, right? And how does that add to conflict in your life? John, 15, has always had difficulty with math. His parents have told him that he has to maintain a B average in order to get his permit. But math is his first class of the day and he is often exhausted. He can't attend tutoring after school because he has swim team practice 4 days a week. The team is incredibly important to him and he is very worried that he will have to quit if he can't get his grades up. So what's his identity? Swimmer, right? What's his parents' value?
Math grades.
Right? Do you think they value the swimming as well?
Not as much.
Not as much, right? How about driving? Is that important to him or to them? Could be. How many of you have kids that don't want to drive?
I've heard a lot of it.
Yeah, so now there are more and more requirements and hoops they have to jump through to get their permits. So a lot of them are like, I'll wait till 18 so I don't have to do as much of that. But there also seems to be this idea that whether it's stress, anxiety, car payments, a lot of parents are saying you have to pay your own insurance or things like that. But often it's more just they don't want to do it. And I think that Uber and Lyft may have had some impact in that too, because they don't have to, right? So there isn't the need for that. But it's interesting how that ties to independence and autonomy, because I think it used to be that if you had a car, you had that, right?
Now they have to pay for their own Uber.
Yes, and sometimes they don't have to pay for it, right? Alyssa, 17, has always been the class clown. She's artistic and has a style all of her own. She confesses to her therapist that she is tired of having to be on all the time, but is afraid that she will lose friends if she becomes more introverted. So again, her identity that she feels like she has to maintain, that people only like her for that reason, kind of trying to build her own confidence as well. So strategies for stage of development. When we're talking about early adolescence, we're really looking at what are your values? What are your family's values? What's your culture in your family? And how do you have rules? How do you monitor that? And how do you set limits? This earlier development is going to be more strict than the later development. That being said, we don't just let go completely, right? Our kids are still learning those skills. And I think often I hear families talk about, they're going to be off at college next year. They need to be able to do this by themselves. But we haven't given them a lot of opportunities to practice those skills. So frequently we have kids that come back from college because they've either been anxious, depressed, kind of bombed out because they haven't had the opportunities to be independent and manage some of those things on their own. We're seeing more and more challenges with kids who have executive functioning issues with planning, follow through, attention. And again, it's something that needs to not just be taught in a class, it needs to be practiced at home as well.
When you say early and late, what age are you, I
So-
know it says adolescence, but.
Right, so I would think again, if you're looking at kind of similar to the sex ed talks, it's happening earlier and earlier when we're looking at the cognitive development and the physical development. So I still think early on, elementary school age, early middle school age, we're looking at that. There are going to be individual differences. You might have a really mature middle schooler and they may have more life experiences. So some of this you might feel like, yeah, they can be more autonomous. They can do some of this. I think the challenges come more when, I've got kids that show up for appointments and they've Ubered here and I never see the parents, and you're like, okay, so is your parent involved? And not to make a judgment, but it speaks to, if you're coming here without a parent, how involved is your parent in the process of something like treatment, right? So I do think we want them to be autonomous, but we also want to make sure that there's kind of a monitoring that's going on, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. So stressors of a typical adolescent: school, feeling misunderstood or unheard by adults, parent-teen relationship dynamics, social media and comparisons, increased competition, individual factors and expectations. When we look more at our specific area, that there's expectations for success, academic standards of Bay Area schools, surrounded by high achievement, packed schedules, potential exposure to peers' suicide or suicide attempts. The other thing I would say is that it's not mentioned in here, but the socioeconomic issues as well. I've had kids that I've worked with who are from less wealthy areas, and they're surrounded by kids who have a lot of things, a lot of affluence. And so when they go to their houses, they often don't want their friends to go to their house. And so again, kind of your identity when you don't want them to be at your home or to meet with other people can really impact you. And it also creates more of this jealousy about the things that other people have, and a need or desire to have things versus those qualities or characteristics. We are trained as children to get good grades, get a good job, get a good spouse, get children, get ahead. In all this getting, we get something else: anxiety and depression. And I hope that I don't want it to be a big bummer either. They don't always get anxiety and depression, but it's common when we have more of those big goals for young kids. So social media and stress. There is a cauldron of stimulation they can't get away from, or don't want to get away from, or don't know how to get away from it. Being a teenager today is a draining full-time job that includes schoolwork, managing a social media identity, and fretting about career, climate change, sexism, racism, you name it. How many of your kids have at least one electronic device? Okay. Is there anyone who doesn't have an electronic device? Okay. How many hours do you think they spend on it? Okay. So that being said, who spends more time on their electronic device? Your child or you? Okay. So the reason I ask is because one of the things we talk about is my kid's always on his phone. They're always checking their messages, seeing what their friends are doing. And then I have kids that I meet with who say, I go to talk to my parent, they're on the phone, right? Or they're, looking for recipes, or they're doing something else. So it's becoming almost an extra layer between our relationships and our communication, where it can give the feeling of that's more, and I'm sure parents have felt that way, like you care more about your game than you care about your family, or you care more about your game than your grades, right? And kids feel the same way sometimes, that my parents, are always on their phone, or they never put their phone down, or they're always working. So we have, kind of, again, the modeling that we're doing for kids. Social media and stress. In general, tend to spend 9 hours a day on social media, 2+ hours a day on social networking sites like Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. Most likely to report distress, poor mental health, and suicidal thoughts. I know, and I was trying to think, how do you fit 9 hours of social media into a day? But between classes, they're looking at social media.
A lot of the during classes.
Yeah.
Not a late night.
So has anybody tried to limit their kids' social media? Okay. How many of you say, and this is hard because more and more schools are also having you use tablets, right, or Chromebooks or other things for work. So even if you say there's no electronics, part of that isn't a reality because they need their electronics to do certain things. And even with the blocks for searching the web and different things, kids still find a way to work around that, right? Absolutely. So have any of you used the, I think it's the Comcast app where you can turn off the internet and manage? Okay. So I can't tell you how many kids I had that were upset with their parents when they're like, it just goes off. Like, I can't use it. My apps go away. And one of the kids was like, when I turn it back on, they're rearranged too. I don't know what happens, but they're not in the same place. And I said, yeah, but it's a privilege to use your phone. And so if your parents are the ones in charge, they're the ones that are limiting that. As we move to that autonomy, right, if your kid is not abusing their electronics, should they be able to control that themselves? Right?
Yeah.
Right. And you would hope so, because if somebody's a senior in high school and they're planning to go away to college, you're not going to, well, I guess if you still manage their data, you might be able to, but they're going to find other places to go to do that. And so they have to learn some of that self-control on their own. That's where we talk with younger kids. We're helping them manage that. So hopefully then they can be successful when they're autonomous.
I'm more surprised at like our schools that allow, some of the teachers allow them to use their phones in the class. And
Right.
that, I think that's not okay.
And I think part of that's the parents needing to talk more to the schools too and saying like, this is a distraction. This is something that takes away from it. I think that the changing, when you're looking at a phone or you're doing an internet search, it changes so quickly all the time. So then if you use a textbook or even you're reading something online, it's a very different feel. So when we talk about kids that are bored or they don't have the patience, part of it is that they're used to things rapidly changing all the time. And so we're kind of hardwiring them in a different way now to expect things to always be immediately at their disposal, right? And if they don't get things immediately, then they get frustrated as well. So social media and stress, internet use has an effect on social relationships and participation in community life. Comparison, others are happier, life is not fair, the social comparison theory. So when we think about Instagram, Snapchat, I'm sure I'm missing some of them. Whenever I say Facebook, my kids are like, yeah, that's for older people. I'm like, sorry. But often we're not posting, and I have seen kids that are posting more sad and depressed kind of things. But usually we're posting about how great our life is, where we went, what we did. And you always see people, I can't tell you how many times I've gone places and there's people there taking their selfies, right? And I'm guilty of that too. It's like you want to keep that memory. So I would say that with kids, one of the things that we're really looking at, especially with teens, is how do you help them be more mindful? How do you help them say, you're so busy taking pictures and doing all of this, you're not enjoying the moment. You're too busy being caught up in capturing it on film instead of capturing the essence of being in it. And so part of that, again, is parents helping kids understand the difference in that and the value in it.
My daughter had an account for the depressive anxiety, a secret account that really spiraled her down because it was where all the kids were
Right.
going to share that dark stuff.
Right.
And then an account that we could see that
Right.
was her normal.
Right. And I think I've watched one too many TV shows too, but I can't tell you when I hear people say, I met somebody online. My first thought is, have you ever chatted with them? Have you ever actually seen them? Because there's so many predators out there and people who aren't predators but are creating their own identities. So they don't like their identity and they can take somebody else's picture and create a different identity. And so it's a lot of escapism, but it's hurtful to other people. So news and stress, connections between media consumption and stress. Negative effects can be mediated with deliberate intervention. There's a study that shows if you're exposed to really stressful news information, that afterwards, if you do mindfulness or meditation types of exercises, that it can actually get you back to a baseline. So it had to do with heart rate. They were showing that other things that you do don't last as long, but kind of that mindfulness of visualization can really help alleviate some of that. We had a lot of kids after the elections that came in, and I was surprised. It was probably across the board, not just teens, it was younger kids too, but who just were repeating things that they'd heard either on the news or from their families. So I had one kid that said, I heard we're going to war with Greece. And I said, okay. I'm like, I haven't heard that yet. And so then as you talked more, they're like, well, you know, my parents said that we're going to go to war. And Greece had something to do with some other news story, but this was a kid who still didn't have the cognitive development. So he heard a piece of one and generalized it to another. Had another kid that said that we're moving to Mexico. And his parents, when I talked to them, said, no, we told him Canada, not Mexico. But again, the literal part of that, where kids actually think, like, is this something that could happen? And not understanding it. So I'm very aware that, you know, we want to educate our kids. We want them to know what's going on in the world, but having an open discussion with them and being aware of their feelings about it is important too. And so often the internet has, or even when you log on, it has all the news things that come up periodically. And so kids see that and it's very overwhelming for them if they don't understand it. Oh, sorry, this part was important. So research shows some benefits for low levels of stress, and this has to do with distress tolerance. So a lot of what we're working with teens is to understand that sadness is a typical feeling that teens have, anxiety is a typical feeling that teens have, some of those mood shifts where you're very happy and very sad are typical for teens. And how we cope with those, how we deal with those. And I think the hardest thing, and I face this a lot as a therapist as well, is when you have someone who's suffering in front of you and they're really sad, wanting to make them feel better and be like, it's okay, or you've got friends and you've got this. But that's their reality. That's really how they're feeling in that moment. And sometimes you just have to sit with them and say, that's really hard, or that really stinks, and validate what they're saying, even if you don't agree with it, because that's what it feels like for them. So negative effects of stress: too much stress or difficulty coping with stress, feeling overwhelmed, burned out, shut down, reduction in performance, sleep challenges, impaired thinking, decision-making, anxiety, and depression. So what's funny is a lot of those are the things we talk about as one of the typical things with the developmental stage though too. So how do you know what's typical and how do you know what is a negative effect of stress? And that's really hard to kind of weed out sometimes. So the stress model, I use this in every presentation, and I use this in every family or child that I work with, regardless of the age, because I think it's super important. So when we look at the stress model, if you think of your baseline behavior when you're calm and what that looks like, and I always joke with parents because some kids aren't calm, right? Some kids rev high. And so their calm is going to look different than a kid who might be more shy or introverted. But if you look at their baseline behavior, and then you have a triggering event. So I get a bad grade at school, I ask friends to do something and they cancel on me or aren't available, they're gonna feel more stressed likely in some of those situations. Or I think my parents are gonna be disappointed in me, I might get in trouble. It doesn't have to be one thing, it can be multiple things over time, but the more stressed we get, 2 is the triggering event, 3 is the crisis mode, and then that's our post-crisis and post-crisis depression. The yellow line is your problem solving and thinking. So think of a time that you've had an argument with your child. In that moment, they're probably not calm, right? They might be crying, they might be yelling, they might be blaming, but they're stressed in that moment. And one of the first things parents do is say, why did you do that? So if I'm stressed, I'm not going to have a good answer for you. I'm not going to say to you, well, I was thinking this and this is what happened. Usually we say, I don't know, leave me alone. You know, it's not my fault. So-and-so did it, right? Because they're not problem solving well. But what also happens is that the other person, the caregiver's escalation goes up as well. So we might be keeping it together for a while and then we keep asking these questions that they're not answering, right? And we're like, well, you know better than this. How can you do this? And if our stress is going up, what's happening to our problem solving? Right, so if you look at the peaks of both of those, that's when we get the power struggles. That's when we get, now you've lost the computer, now you're grounded for the rest of the week, because we're not problem solving well. And so in those moments, it's very hard to then go back later and correct in some ways and say, well, you're only grounded for 1 week, or I was overreacting. But in those cases, we're both overreacting because we're stressed. So having a self-care plan is super important in those moments to recognize when you're starting to move away from your baseline, when you're getting stressed. And when a kid walks away, sometimes they're trying to get back to baseline. And we're like, don't walk away from me, why are you doing this, right? And it's the same thing when a parent walks away from a kid. I'm not gonna argue with you. We're trying to regain, and it's that fight or flight response. We're trying to regain our calm, but in that moment, they're feeling like, you're not listening to me, you're not hearing me. So it's great to be able to say, let's talk when we're both calm. We're gonna say things we don't mean, or this isn't the right timing for this. And showing them this kind of example, I think can really be helpful too. So exercise self-control plan. How do you react to your teen's problem behavior? Create a concrete plan for regaining immediate self-control, simple, specific, and usable. So it may be something like one of the things that when I've worked with really more aggressive and explosive kids, it can't last forever. You know, it'll pass. And also recognizing you want to take energy away from the situation, not put more energy into it. So if you're starting to feel like you're getting revved up, you're starting to put too much energy into it. So really trying to just take those deep breaths. The other thing is sometimes just taking a step back if it's an emotionally charged situation. Maybe getting a drink of water. Identifying methods for restoring your balance immediately after work and as a lifestyle. Self-care. And self-care is really important to model for teens as well because they are feeling stressed. So how can we help them kind of return to baseline when there are stressful events, whether it's tests, performances. Some kids have more social anxiety, so if you know something's coming up, how do we help them get through those situations? And then remember you're modeling for your teen. Communication is key. Try to start a conversation. So, timing is very important when you try and start a conversation. I can't tell you how many teens I work with and they're like, I just got started on my homework and then they came in and wanted to ask me something or something else. Questions for teens can seem like the worst thing a parent can do. I went to a training once and I really liked this example. Instead of saying, how was your day? What did you do today? And asking questions, it was making statements. So if you said, you had a math test today. Didn't you have practice after school? You're not, and that is a question, but you had practice after school today. And I realized I ask a lot of questions, so it's really hard for me to do this one. But if you make statements, usually they will add to that. And even if it's a yes, then you can say, oh, was today a day in the gym or was this a day in the field? So you can ask some questions that you turn into statements, because I did it again. But it's really interesting because usually it also helps cognitively frame the situation for the kids, especially if they have memory issues or focus issues. By giving them the details, they've now created a picture in their head and it's easier for them to recall. And so that can help with communication as well. Pick a time to talk that works for your teen. Conversation starters, try for specifics. Do your friends have more time for fun than you do? What do you and your friends think would make school less stressful? What things make you happy lately? Now, I can imagine you saying this to your kids and being like, I don't know, or why do you want to know that? You know, a smart aleck kid maybe, are you writing a book? Like, why do you want to do that? So I would not do this verbatim. You're going to know what works for your kid. You're going to know if your kid works better with humor or other things. But try and really think about what's the information that you're wanting and why do you want it? So if you're asking a question and you don't really care about the answer, and I think we all say, oh, of course we care about our kid. We want to know how their day is. But some kids come in and they go, every day my mom asks me how my day is and nothing's changed or it's the same, right? So sometimes we also have to think about how we like to be approached, right? There's some faux pas we're going to look at, and there's one in there that always stands out for me. So tips to keep the conversation going: listen, be focused on the moment, pay attention, nonverbal cues, and empathize. And this is true not just of your teens, but if anyone, I know that my husband can be a little long-winded. And there's times where I'm doing multiple things at home and I find myself walking away while he's talking and I'm like, oh, my nonverbal, that's really bad. And so I tend to be like, I'm gonna go in the kitchen, but I'm still listening to you. But he still feels sometimes like, no, you're doing other things. And so being aware of sometimes we need those times where we're 100% focused on that. And in our busy lives, that can be really challenging to change that type of dynamic. Try to avoid timing. He picked the worst time to talk to me, which is true. They often do pick the worst times. You're in a hurry, you're out the door, and you're like, you had all night to talk to me about this or to ask me to sign your permission slip. Why are you doing this now? Minimizing. It's just high school drama. It doesn't mean anything. And to them, it means everything, right? Judging. She's too emotional. That's where he's wrong. Assuming. He's just jealous of his sister. She's doing this to spite me. And again, I feel like a lot of those things come up more when we're stressed, when we're in that stress model mode, that then all of those negative thoughts start to come in. And that's where doing your own self-talk of saying, this isn't personal, this is part of their development, you know, it'll pass. Try to avoid shaming. That's so dumb. And I'm sure you guys say that, right? Knee-jerk advice. What you should do is, and then swooping in to say, I can call his mom and we can talk about what happened. And I can't tell you how many, or a teacher, let me talk to the teacher for you. So we want kids to communicate with their teachers, and sometimes they don't know how to do that. So facilitating that, especially with younger teens, makes sense that you would model how to send an email to a teacher, that you would do that, and then or encourage them to do it and you watch while they do it, right? The ones about calling other people's moms, though, that's a huge no-no in the social circle. And the what should you do is, I always laugh at this because this is one of my triggers. Like when someone says, oh, you should do this. I'm like, what? No, I shouldn't, So if it's a trigger for you, it's probably going to be a trigger for your kid as well. So think of how you like to be communicated to or with. Continue to provide support. Check in often, make time to interact casually, observe honestly, listen carefully, ask questions, and trust your intuition. Love and connection. Seize those A moments. Acknowledge, affirm, and appreciate their aptitudes and accomplishments. Expect increasing criticism. Remember, you don't get it. It's part of establishing their own identity. Engage more time in listening than lecturing. You'll spend more time with your teen. One of the things that I think about when we're talking about progress or accomplishments or goals, being really aware of what's important to you and what's important to them. And there's so many kids that'll say, I don't care, and we know they care, right? But there's so much pressure on our kids to do things a certain way, and really try to remember it's progress, not perfection, that none of us are perfect. And there's a slide in here where we talk about a growth mindset. Have any of you heard of that kind of theory? So we'll talk briefly about that, but that ties into this, that if you have a fixed mindset, it's all or nothing, right? If you don't get the A, then you failed, instead of learning from that experience and how to do it differently the next time. Guide and limit. Determine when to hold them and when to fold them. Balance firmness with flexibility, compliance with compromise. So if you are always compromising, though, what happens?
Negotiator.
You get a negotiator. And also, are there certain things that are non-negotiable?
Yes.
Right, so I think establishing family values, family rules is super important, and that doesn't change as they get older. If there's certain things that aren't acceptable in your house, then they need to be aware that those are certain things that aren't acceptable, and it's going to be different in everybody's house. And again, in that stress model mode, I hear the teens saying, well, Johnny gets to stay out, till this time, and it's like, well, then go live with Johnny, right? And then it's like, oh, my parents don't want me here, they don't understand me. So it becomes this cycle, right? And that isn't the message we want to give them. We want to give them that I love and care for you, and we want you here, and we're going to work on this together. And we talked about the 8 o'clock curfew in one of the other vignettes, right? So that might be something where, okay, it's 8 o'clock on a Sunday, but if your homework's done, you can go with those friends and you can stay out till 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock. But again, for a sophomore, I think there are such variations in this area. Some kids are staying up, until midnight studying. So they're in sports, they're in activities, and they come home and they study, and then they get up and they do it all over again. And so the stress of having to complete all of those tasks, too, can be hard. Choose your battles. Is behavior really only annoying versus wrong or harmful? Establish limited set of rules and their natural consequences ahead of time. That helps keep it issue-based rather than person-based. I also talk about competency versus compliance. So I will frequently work with parents and teachers who say, this kid's manipulative. They might say things like, they're doing it on purpose, or they can control it. They can do it in this setting, so they must be able to do it all the time. And there's lots of reasons why kids can't do things, or teens can't do things across settings. So when we think about if your friends are present and you have to work with your identity, you might be able to do something at home really easily, or be really polite and follow through, and then you get around your friends and suddenly I get the attitude. So try and be mindful of when you're asking them to do things and how, and to front load it. So if you know that can be an issue, it's like, hey, when I come to pick you up, I don't want any arguing, like it's time to go. And if you can go at this time, then you still get these privileges at home. As they become more and more autonomous, they're not going to be probably always going with you, right? They're going to be going with their friends or other people. And so how do they set their own limits with those people? And I often will joke and say, make your parent the bad guy. It's like, my mom says I have to come home at this time, because sometimes that's an easier out for your friends if they don't think it's you saying it. Because some of our kids don't have those kind of social identities yet to stand up to their friends. And until they do, we want to make sure that they're still making safe decisions. Monitoring and observing, know everything about without imposing upon. So unless there's a safety issue, ignorance is not bliss. So that unless there's a safety issue means that you are going to impose. If there's a safety issue, you need to address it. The ignorance is not bliss is more that so often it's like, well, everything's fine, I haven't heard anything, right? But being engaged, being aware, finding out about different things that are going on in the community as well. How many of you have had your kids talk about vaping? Okay. So do the rest of you know what vaping is? Okay. So, and I'm probably going to describe it wrong, but so some people use vaping where it's liquid that's flavored liquid that you inhale, and it's basically a replacement to smoking things. And so it's been a big trending item, and the one that just came out recently, and I'm probably going to call it the wrong thing, I think it's called, thank you, I was going to call it Pure, I knew that was wrong, Juul, and it looks like a USB port. So people can carry it around in their backpacks. It looks just like something you would bring to school, and it's very easy then to take hits off of it. So a lot of kids start off because it's cool and their friends are doing it, so it's like, oh, let's try the cherry flavor, let's try this. But it's also a way to use marijuana. And so it doesn't have the smell and smoke and kind of flame that you would have if they were using a pipe or something different. And so for a lot of kids, this has become really, really enticing. And it's very hard for them to say no because it's easily available as well. So those.
Question, they can do marijuana with the vape?
So they get different kinds of, and again, I'm doing this from what I've heard. I don't know. I believe it's a liquid THC that they're using for the vape.
So there's nicotine, and then there's marijuana, and then there's also just these like
Flavors.
flavor
Right.
things.
Right. So being vigilant about onset of physical, emotional changes. When in doubt, check it out. A big one is, teens sleep a lot, right? They need a lot of sleep. But if you're seeing a loss of interest in things they were previously interested in, if you see big weight gains or weight losses, again, their physical development is part of what they're dealing with. And so you're going to see changes, but those are, when you see big drastic changes, those are really important to be aware of. One of the kids I worked with recently didn't have any of those symptoms. And so the parents are like, he's well liked at school, he plays sports, he gets good grades, and this kid was completely suffering inside. And he's like, I just can't handle the pressure anymore, I feel like I need to give up. And those are things, when we talk about this, we really have to think in terms of just because it looks good on the outside doesn't mean what they're going through on the inside matches. And so the parents kept saying like, how can this kid be depressed? Like everything's going good for them. So just because they're not having traumatic life events that would be depressing doesn't mean that they're not suffering internally. Communicate with and around your teen. Messages from and about him or her should have a consistent theme to them. I also, will hear teens say, my parents said this. They don't hear the 100 good things you said about them. They remember the things about, my parents think I'm lazy, my parents think that I can do better, I'm not good enough. So you may not have said you're not good enough, but they interpret it that way if a grade wasn't good enough, right? And so, and not all of them do, but that's often kind of where the sadness comes from, because it goes back to kind of feeling proud of themselves and who they are and where they fit in the world. So consider abilities, consider temperament, consider interest. What's really important to your teen? And I would guess a lot of them, it is that video games or friends, right? Emotional well-being, schedule and commitments. Avoid reliving parents' personal goal or missed opportunities. And usually we want what's best for our kid, right? And so in our head, we want them to have all those opportunities. We want them to have a good education. We want them to have a good job. We want those things for them. And sometimes those are things that we push more, and it doesn't give them that internal sense of mastery or locus of control that I'm driving this train, right? It's kind of like I'm doing this because my parents want me to do this, which is true part of the time, but we also want them to value it. Model and consult. Your teen will likely emulate many parts of you. Do you like what you see? Change starts from within, not with your teen. It's a high wire balancing act. Push out versus pull back. Protect versus challenge. You must be the net beneath them. Be your teen's go-to person for information, perspectives, and opportunities. So this last one, I think, is something that I want to clarify, because we just talked about autonomy and them wanting to be more independent, but they want you to be there when they need you, right? And we don't always know when they're going to need us. And so being available, whether they want us there or not, at least then we can provide other resources for them. Actions speak louder than words. Although friends are a huge influence, the family unit and parents still have a great effect on teens. Think about family culture and how that might support teens or add to feelings of pressure. Reflect on your actions and behaviors. How do they shape your teens' perceptions of healthy behaviors? Encourage healthy habits, improving physical health, finding a balance and practicing self-care, time management, problem solving. So what if I notice that my kid's having really bad eating habits, and I start saying, let's start eating healthier. Let's, have some protein in the morning. We'll make you a healthy breakfast and eggs. And on the weekends, we can go for hikes together. What do you think my teen's going to think or say?
I'm fat.
Right. Or I'm not good enough, or why do you want to do this, or I don't need you to do this, right? So sometimes it's just having those options there for them, limiting the other options. But when we criticize the way they're doing something, or even if we question it, it feels like criticism to teens. So that being said, I don't want everybody to walk around with teen gloves on where it's like, okay, we can't say this, we can't say that. You still need to make sure that there's certain values in your house. So some families are like, we just don't have soda in our house, or we don't have sugar in our house, so we don't have that. Other families are like, I'm not giving up my soda and my candy, right? So it's kind of that modeling too, that we often will, if we're hungry, go to what's in the house, do the things that are there. So if any of these are at an extreme, the child is probably, or the teen is probably going to reject it because it feels pushed on them. If you can get them to have the idea, even if it's something like, I feel like I haven't been eating that healthy lately, or we haven't been having sit-down meals together, what's something that you would want to make, or what's something you would want to do? And again, they might be like, I don't have time for this, but engaging them in the process can often make them feel heard, make them feel valued, and can promote some of these healthy habits. So faux pas for adolescents, skipping breakfast. There was a study of 400 teens that they had done that said half of them reported skipping breakfast, eating on the run, snacking. Healthy eating habits should be 3 meals and 2 snacks a day, remembering that the body demands more calories during early adolescence than any other time of life, which surprises me. I would have thought little infants needed more. Chronic sleep loss and associated sleepiness and daytime impairments in adolescents are a serious threat to the academic success, health, and safety of our nation's youths and the important public health issues. And that's from the American Academy of Psychiatry. Promote healthy sleeping patterns, limit device use at night. How many of you limit your device use at night? Do you have screens in your bedroom? No? Okay. Take electronics before bed. If you start this early, it's much easier to do. When you've had a problem and then you try and take electronics, it can be more difficult. Setting up the rules in advance. If you abuse your phone, then I'm going to take it away from you. And they're like, and I can't tell you how many kids I have that will hide phones or go and get them in the middle of the night. Parents will find them playing with them that after they've retrieved them. So having a set way of what you do. I've had some families where they've had to take, now everything's wireless, but they used to take cords from either the TV or the laptop and lock them in their trunk in their car because they'd say, well, how can I limit them if it's there? And so you also have to make sure that you're ready to kind of toe the line and not have it be over the top. So knowing where your boundary is, knowing the tools available to you, and that's where I think everybody's really liking the Xfinity app because you can turn things off by using your own phone to do it, and then they can't get it back on, and limit the hours and things like that. So that can be really helpful. And I'm sure there's other apps. That's just the one that I've heard families talk about. Create a sleep routine. How many of you have a good sleep routine? Yay, I'm liking this group over here. So when we're stressed, right, or we have deadlines, or we have things going on, we may not be the best taskmaster either. And so we might be modeling, last minute deadlines or kind of eating unhealthy or staying up late to finish projects. And that's not always a bad thing, but if it's a habit and they see that that's how things get done, kids may model that as well. Other times, parents have routines, they have schedules, they have all of that, and kids buck it because they're being independent and they want to test those limits too. And I've had a lot of kids that will also say, I'm getting good grades, why can't I have more computer time? Or I'm getting good grades, why can't I stay up later? And it has less to do about the good grades and more to do about how healthy it is for you and how well you're functioning with limited sleep. Encourage school schedules that allow for a later start time. I would say that studies show that that helps. Having that happen when we're trying to cram more and more classes into schedules is not very likely. But if you can work with your teen and they have some choice in their schedule and saying, hey, don't take a first period class, start later and end later, can be really helpful if it works for the schedule. Set a consistent bedtime. Discourage caffeine use in the afternoons or evenings. And it's funny because the one that a lot of kids, I think, don't connect with is chocolate. They always think of it as like coffee or soda, and chocolate's another one that can really impact them, not just because of the sugar, but because of the caffeine. Helping teens find balance. Teens are trying to figure out who they are and what is important to them. They're adapting values and expectations. Seek a balance between achievement, involvement, and happiness. Remind them mistakes provide great learning opportunities. Time management, help teams develop organizational strategies, help teens plan long-term assignments, visually map out weekly responsibilities and schedule. And for some kids, they don't need that, but it also helps, like when you think about using your own calendars or things like that. I have some kids that really resist writing things down, and they'll say, I remember, or they've got it on a scrap of paper in their pocket or stuck in their backpack. And so helping kind of model that, and when it's functional for them and it works, it's a lot more effective. And when they're involved in doing it and we're not making them do it, it can be a lot more buy-in too. So balance time for activities and homework, break large tasks into manageable chunks, set time limits for studying, make time for breaks and downtime, create a working space free of distractions. Teach problem solving, identify the main issue, set a goal, make a realistic plan. And I'm gonna give a extreme example, but I worked with a boy who was like, I want to be a professional singer, and he was a really big fan of American Idol. And in my head, I kept picturing him trying out for American Idol and being one of the videos that's not so great. And I said, so of course, like as a therapist, I'm not trying to direct his future, but at the same time, I'm thinking, okay, so how are we going to address this if it's not a realistic goal? So I said, that's really awesome. So what are you doing to become a professional singer? He's like, what do you mean? I go, will you in choir? No. Do you take voice lessons? No. Well, maybe we should start there and see how that works. So I think there's ways when kids come to you and they're enthusiastic about something that you may feel like that's ridiculous or that's not a good path for you. How do we encourage them to explore those interests without it being detrimental to them or without it being a pipe dream, right? So this is what I was talking about earlier, the fixed mindset versus the growth mindset. The fixed mindset, if you look at your situation, what you desire, a fixed mindset says to look smart or talented in every situation, to never fail. Is that realistic? No. But do we feel that way sometimes? None of us want to look dumb, right? So when you think about this, I want you to think in terms of, do you have a fixed mindset or do you have a growth mindset? So to stretch and grow, to try things and take risks because you can. And I would say we probably want to be somewhere in between, right? Because when you think about younger generations and taking risk, we also don't want them to take foolish risk, right? So we want them to be mindful in that sense of the types of risks they're taking. If you fail or succeed at the event or task, will the event or task make you look smart or dumb so you're afraid to fail? When you're evaluating tasks or events, a growth mindset is that this event will help you learn and grow. Will it challenge you? You're not afraid to fail. How you're facing your challenges, a growth mindset, you embrace challenges because they offer the opportunity to grow and you love challenges. A fixed mindset, avoid challenges because you could fail, you fear challenges. How you face external obstacles, give up easily, blaming someone or something. And again, that sounds more like teens, that often it's difficult for them to take responsibility. A growth mindset is that you persist despite the existence of obstacles. How you see effort and work, it's fantastic. Any growth requires effort and work. Effort is the path to success. Because you know how often teens say that, right? Mm-hmm. And then why bother? I can't change anything. Effort means you lack talent. How do you take feedback or criticism? I'm interested. You want to learn from criticism. How can this help you grow and learn? Ignore criticism, become defensive. How can you hide the criticism? How do you feel about other people's success? Fixed mindset is threatened and fearful. If someone else succeeds, then they might be viewed as more talented than the person. Or happy, other people's success means you can learn from them, you're inspired. Effects on others, invite cooperation and teamwork with a growth mindset, impede cooperation and teamwork. So again, I think we go between these at times depending on what the activity is, depending on our own views, but having teens be aware of these two differences and how it can impede their success in different situations if they're falling under the fixed mindset. Some people with a fixed mindset, it works in their favor. If it's something that works for you, you're going to continue to use it. But what they've found is that fixed mindset people tend to plateau and achieve less than their full potential, where growth mindset keep growing and reach higher and higher levels of achievement. So support well-rounded development, promote happiness, encourage social connectedness with friends and family, encourage your teen to participate in pleasurable activities and join in when you can. The key is that it's pleasurable to the teen, right? Not to you. Foster a culture of gratitude and kindness, volunteering, gratitude jar, listing 5 positive things at dinner, helping teens find meaning. I do a lot of work with teens about their inner voice and when they're on a kind of a negative track. And so we'll talk about like that voice that's going on inside about whether it's, I'm not good enough or this is too hard. I tell kids I work with all the time, you can't tell me no. And they're like, well, and I'm like, yeah, like if you say no, you have to tell me what you can do because there's something you can do. And so no to me isn't an option. There's always something you can do, and I'm not going to pick it for you. You need to tell me what you can do. And usually once they get started, they find out there's a lot more they can do, but they're stuck in that moment of it's too hard, I can't do this, I don't want to do this, why am I doing this? Provide and advocate, it's all about networking. Know the resources available to you and your teen. Parents, misery loves company. Parent support groups are really valuable and important, but also just talking to other parents and feeling like, is this normal? Is your kid doing this? Are you feeling the same thing? We all have our bad parent moments too. And, I think if we think that everyone else is doing it right, we're, kidding ourselves that everybody makes mistakes and sometimes we do things that we regret later. And just kind of move on from that and recognize that that's an opportunity for growth for you. And be honest with your kids. Apologize when you make a mistake. Point out to them that you overreacted or that you said something unkind. Find an adult mentor and then relinquish some of your parent as counselor roles. Emphasize influencing, persuading over trying to control and coerce. Establishing effective boundaries. Speak in love, identify truth, permit freedom, enforce consequences, both logical and immediate. So especially with younger kids, I think that the logical one is super important for parents. There's different levels. So if somebody spills something, you can have them clean it up. That's a logical consequence for that, right? As they get older, you have to think in terms of what's going to be the logical consequence and how's it going to impact their identity, the social aspect. It doesn't mean they don't get consequences, but it means if they don't want it to impact those things, they need to think more before they act and really kind of think that through and encourage them to do that. I always think identify truth is an interesting one. My husband and I talk about this all the time because he'll say something that is really on the verge of hurtful. And I'll go, that wasn't very nice. And he goes, well, it's the truth. And so being aware, too, of how sensitive your child is going to be to something. So let's say they are gaining weight, right? Or they aren't eating healthy. That may be the truth, but how that impacts their identity and their feelings about themselves can be detrimental in the opposite way. So being mindful of how you phrase things with them. Behaviors worth noting, and we talked briefly about this already, sudden or gradual changes like moodiness, especially with close peers, dropping activities they enjoyed, increased fearfulness or anxiety, unrealistic standards, ongoing sleep changes, increased physical complaints, big changes in appetite, change in academic performance, increased isolation, new group of friends, and mood swings. One thing that's important to think about is when you're going from middle school to high school, some of these things are going to change. So you might be more moody with your friends if your friends are spending time with new friends, right? And you feel left out. Dropping activities they enjoyed. You may have a kid that played basketball their whole life, and they get to high school and they don't want to play. And I often will talk to parents about cut, no-cut sports, because if it's a no-cut sport and it's a sport they like, everybody plays. If it's a cut sport, they may drop the sport because they're afraid they're going to get cut or they're not good enough. Increased fearfulness or anxiety, what was the other one I was going to talk about? Change in academic performance, it's the same kind of thing. You may have been a big fish in a little pond before, and you go where there's more kids and more achievement, and you might not be the top student anymore. And so a lot of that can make you feel anxious or not care as much because you're worried about failing. Concerning behaviors, self-harm, suicidal ideation, physical aggression, problems with sleeping and eating, excessive weight gain or loss, withdrawal, alcohol and drug use, and sexual promiscuity. There may be, interest in some of these areas that aren't as concerning. If you have kids that are coming home and throwing up because they've been at a party and drinking, if you have kids that have lost 20 pounds in a month, those are going to be things where it's very concerning. And thinking about those. It doesn't mean it doesn't happen, but if they're minimizing it, like everybody drinks or I just drank too much, those are things that, again, you want to be mindful of. I've been really, really shocked in probably the last year. I had mentioned at the beginning that I've worked here for 18 years. The change in frequency of self-harm behaviors and ideations has skyrocketed. Every kid that I've had referred to me for therapy in the last year, probably middle school and up, has all had some kind of self-harm or suicidal ideation. And so that's really scary, and I think that goes with the climate we're talking about this area, that they're hearing more and more people talk about suicide or self-harm. And so I don't want to say it's becoming cool, but there's also this idea like, oh, well, so-and-so is getting treatment. Like I've had people like, oh, my friend's getting therapy, so I'm coming for therapy. And it's like, well, why do you want to be here? But again, it's that identity. And so if our identity is now becoming more of this, people don't understand me and my emotions, what we want to teach, though, is strategies and ways to tolerate those distress feelings. And, I'm one of those people, I feel like everybody could benefit from therapy, so we want to reduce the stigma in that. But the amount of self-harm and suffering that I'm seeing, and a lot of it is related to pressure and just feeling like they're either not good enough or they're, I had one kid that was like junior high area and he was like, I'm not going to get into college. And I was like, that's a little early to be thinking about some of that. And he's like, no, and especially if they have older siblings that are going through that process of applications, private school applications, all of that can be really, really hard. And then if you're a kid who's not even wanting to go to college or, you're the first kid in your family to go to college, looking at the people around you who are getting all of these, acceptance letters or things like that can be really, really hard as well.
For my daughter, the self-harm really got exacerbated with the social media. And
Right.
the account that I said she had that was kind of a secret account.
Right.
I mean, the stuff that these kids are posting, how to do it, how to hide it.
Right.
How to, and so that's something that, and I have a 50-50 custody situation, so I was parenting her through an alias false Instagram half of the time because her dad was clueless.
Yeah.
And it's, so.
Yeah. And I, some of the teens I've worked with, they're pretty savvy about hiding it, especially if they're cutting. And so being aware if you see marks on your kids and, you're wondering what they are, they seem unusual. Same thing with bruises. If you have a kid who's getting bruised a lot and they're like, oh, I'm just clumsy, you might wonder if they're using drugs or alcohol because they might be running into things more or falling down more if they're really overusing. Other times, there's a lot of athletes in sports where it's like, no, they just are bruised because they're playing sports. And so you don't want to also think if my kid's bruised, you're a drug addict. Mm-hmm. So that's the part where it's monitoring and observing without overreacting and asking questions and kind of seeing, because you should know your kid better than anyone. And yet, where do they spend most of their time? At school, right? They spend more time during the day at school and with their friends than they do at home with us. And so as they get more independent and they're spending less time at home, it becomes more and more challenging too. Options for help: parent consultation and education, evaluation and screening, individual or family therapy, group therapy, executive functioning coaching, educational services, medication, and intensive outpatient programs. Those are only a few of them. There's all sorts of other things: boys and girls clubs, volunteering. These are ones that are more professional help if you're seeing some of those really big concerns that you're having.
Is your IOP going to be a DBT group?
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah. We started it, I think, almost a year ago in May.
Those are big acronyms.
Yep.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
That's okay.
Intensive outpatient program.
Got it.
So our intensive outpatient program is 4 days a week, and it's from 3 to 6:30, and it has a parent component where the parents have to participate. DBT is dialectic behavior therapy, which is also a form of cognitive behavioral therapy. So now that I've said what they mean, you're like, but what is that, right? So it's the idea that you can change the way someone thinks to change how they feel. And so with dialectic behavior therapy, it was originally designed to use more with adults. The studies had been used more with adults who have had self-harm behavior. And what they found is that with research that it's the leading intervention for teens to decrease the likelihood of suicide attempts. And I always go back to, it's a lot of mindfulness training of kind of being more aware, being more grounded, distress tolerance, a lot of kind of like when your feelings and thoughts come to you, why are they coming to you, and how do you move on? It's got behavioral components, so if you have a problem behavior, what happened immediately before that behavior, and what was the trigger for you that either kept you from doing it or not doing it. So I feel very strongly that a lot of those things overlap, and my background has always been more behavioral, and when I was introduced to DBT, I'm like, this is perfect because it combines all of the things I already like. There is a spirituality thing, and a lot of the mindfulness part, I think people feel like, oh, is it more Eastern philosophy, or does it have other connotations? And I think you make that what it is to you. But what I like is when you think about how busy your days are and how busy your kids' days are, just actually taking time to observe and look around you really helps with more of that problem solving and awareness for kids and adults too.
And for us, the parent component really provided a platform for us to have these conversations and to do the homework.
Right.
Where it wasn't like, okay, we weren't probing, it was like, okay, now we have to sit down and do
Right.
so it provided a platform for that, and it made a huge difference.
And I don't know if we're going to continue with, I shouldn't say that. Right now we have a DBT skills group too, which is not part of the IEOP program. And it's 1 day a week, so it's less intensive, and it's more of a class, but it's to teach these skills. And the way that DBT works is they have modules, and there's 4 modules. So we have a beginning and end entry point for the DBT skills group. So somebody may say, well, I'm just going to do the distress tolerance module, or I'm going to move on to this. Because it's fairly new in the last year for us, there's a lot of kind of growth. We've had huge referrals for it, and kind of trying to figure out, do we take the most severe kids that are most at risk when so many kids need it? But there are other IOP programs in the area. There's one at El Camino Hospital called Aspire, and then Mills Hospital has one as well. And then like Sandy Hill House does.
Sandy's amazing.
Yeah, so they
If
do.
anybody wants to talk to me, I'll tell you all about Sandy. She's amazing.
But there's a lot of people, like even in my treatment, I will integrate DBT skills, but to do it with credibility, there's really a formal way to do it where they actually have phone coaching and all of these other levels. I go back to, I feel like any exposure to those skills is better than no exposure, but to really go through so you can't just say, oh, Kendra did DBT with me, because then we don't, and what if they say, oh, it didn't work? The evidence-based models are the ones that are very intensive and have more of these supports integrated with it. It's not just one element or the other.
And I think a really important thing for us was to find a good fit. So my daughter did Aspire, and it was horrific for her. She actually got kicked out, and she was younger, but it was geared towards middle school, and she acts much more like a high schooler.
Right.
So when we did it with Sandy, this was before you had it.
Yeah.
We did it with Sandy, who was gearing it towards older kids,
Right.
and was much less regimented. She gave my daughter a lot more freedom. She was allowed to say things that she wasn't allowed to say in Aspire.
Yeah.
So it was a better fit for her. I think that's an important thing, is just finding, like, all DBT isn't the same, finding the right therapist, finding the right fit.
And you're also going to find that the dynamics of a group, any group you do, is going to change as the population in that group changes. So you might say, oh, you had a great experience at Sandy's, and we're going to go do that group, and then somebody else says, oh, they have more severe kids now, or something different. So I want to open it up to questions. And I am so sorry, on the resource list, I put down some of the books that I think are helpful and some of the websites and articles, But what I did not put down, which I think is really, really important, are the crisis numbers. And regardless of the age of your teen, the crisis numbers are really, really important. So on the back table, I put some of the cards out. One of them is a text helpline that teens can use. So if they're feeling depressed and they can't go to their parents, having somebody else that they can text. There's Star Vista's crisis line, and they have a parent kind of consultation line. They've got a 24-hour crisis line. So I feel like those are great numbers. And then there's emergency, like hospital kind of numbers on our CHC card. So I'm sorry if I did not put out enough of them because it was kind of an afterthought where I'm like, oh, I didn't get the extreme things you might need. But I encourage people, including the kids I work with, take pictures on your phone so you always have them with you. And that way, because we lose cards, and especially kids, like kids with cards, that's not a good combo, but they're not going to lose that phone, right? Okay, take it. Yeah. So any questions or scenarios that you want to throw at me and I can problem solve with you? Yeah.
So figuring out when the executive functioning is getting in the way of the time management versus being on there distracted because they're half looking at a screen, half losing track of time, and how much do we manage it over trying to create that autonomy and independence?
Right. So I'm going to throw something else in there. If your child has a diagnosed learning disability or ADHD or other type of mental health issue, it's going to impair the executive functioning piece. So if you already know they have low processing or they have speech and language issues, any of those things, keep in mind, and for those of you who don't know executive functioning, it's more about that long-term planning, task completion, sometimes focus as well, but it's really helping to break big things down into smaller pieces as well, so a lot of scaffolding that's involved in that. And those are skills that, schools are starting to teach more and more of, but a lot of times it's even the things like, you say, well, did you write your homework down in your, binder? And you look and it's blank, and the teacher's like, well, we told them to write it down. So sometimes to get that habit going and that pattern going, it is involving the teacher and having them sign off on things or do other things. So that makes sense maybe in middle school, but now I'm getting to high school, how much is that? And so I've had a lot of families I work with too where we joke about, is it your project or your kid's project? Because do you let them fail? And if you don't, because you're like, if you fail, then it's going to impact your grades, and it's going to impact your college, and it's going to impact these other things. But are they learning how to do it on their own? So it goes back to this competency versus compliance. If I don't have the skills to do it, I'm going to fail. So you can say, well, you do it and fail, but that's not teaching me the skills. So somewhere in there has to be this, I'm not going to do it for you. I can show you how to do it. And then even with me showing you how to do it, is there still a deficit there, right? So again, tutors can help sometimes. Some of the tutors, though, aren't teaching executive functioning and planning and some of that scaffolding, or they don't know the schools as well, so they come in and they're asking the kids to bring in the assignment, but they're not coordinating with the teachers. There's a program in Los Altos called Goals, and they're one of the few programs that is more built out, where they have people that will do tutoring, but they also will work with kids that are really struggling academically, kids who have school avoidance, kids who've had absences due to illness and are really behind. And they will work with the school and say, and the parents, and say, I'm taking this off your plate and I'm gonna work with your child and kind of task manage it for them and with them and teach them how to do it. The one part that's hard for parents is they say to the kids, I'm not working for your parent, although the parents are paying, I'm working for you. So how are we going to achieve these goals together? So it really gives them that empowered feeling. But if you have a kid who's depressed or anxious, their motivation to be there and to do that isn't going to be as strong. But it's a good program in the sense that it gives someone else the responsibility other than you. And often the kids will respond to that. Because when they start making up the work or starting to learn skills, they feel better, right? I don't think any kid wants to fail, Other questions? Did that answer your question? Okay. Yeah.
What do you do when you have a child that does not respond well to consequences? So I don't mean like a regular child. I mean someone that...
Or is it a regular child?
Yeah. No, I have one regular child. Just no matter what we would do, he would fight us. Like, for instance, taking away the phone at night. We said, okay, we want the phone by 9:30. And then we changed it to 10 after he browbeat us for months. And we had about 3 years of fighting every night over the freaking phone. 3 years. It was miserable. It was miserable for us because when we're supposed to be settling down for bed too,
Right.
we're dealing with this. And then waking up in the middle of the night because your son's on all fours with a flashlight trying to get to the phone.
Right.
And, you know, or you wake up and he's standing above you and just sounds, "Where's my phone?" You
Right.
know? It's like a nightmare. So we gave up. We gave up. And so he's got the phone every night, which I know isn't ideal.
And how old is he?
He's 14.
And who
I
paid?
am in the same position, so I feel like you just said what my life is, so
Okay.
thank you.
Who pays the bill?
Well, let me go further. Before I know what you're saying, like, okay, well, you just do it. The problem is, like I say, he will wreak havoc on our physical property, etc. Yeah. So
And one thing I want to say, just as we share stories too, I want you to feel like this is a safe place to share your stories. And there is no judgment. Everybody's in a different place, and some of you may say, "Whew, I'm glad that's not my kid," and other people may say, "That's exactly my kid, but worse," right? And so I just want to put that out there that there's nothing I haven't heard.
yeah. Oh, I know.
But other parents might be
Yeah.
like, "Oh, wait, I came here to
We've
talk to
had a
him."
lot of, help for him, a lot of stuff. And bottom line is, he is safe, generally speaking, and he's happy, and he has friends. And he's not doing drugs or alcohol. And so we keep finding ourselves lowering our bar for him. You know, even though he's an incredibly gifted, wonderful kid, it's like we're at the point where, well, he's alive, he's safe, he has friends. He's not on drugs or alcohol,
Right,
and he is happy.
right.
You know, so that's our new bar for him. And it feels like we're letting him down as parents because we're not following through or creating these consequences, but nothing works.
Can he go without his phone at school?
His school implemented a no phone rule at school, which I was so thrilled about. But their consequence for if they see you with a phone is they take it until the end of the day. Well, he quickly realized that, well, I should just use it until they take it, because then I've got more than I started with.
Right.
You know what I mean? At least I can have it until they take it. If they take it, I'm no worse off than I was before because I wasn't supposed to have it anyway.
Right. And do they have a repeat offender, or have they not gotten that smart yet?
He ends up having Friday reflections, which is detention on Fridays. And the vice principal was like, yep, out of the hundreds of kids we have, he's the one that figured out that loophole.
Right.
And I'm like, well, do something. I don't
Yeah.
know. And I
No.
told him, you have my permission to do whatever you need to do.
Right.
You know, take it over the weekend, do whatever. And I'm sure they're like, why don't you deal with this at home, lady? But
No, and we had kids that would, when I worked in a therapeutic special day class, we had kids that would test the boundaries, and they knew there were certain things that if we, you had like, I don't know if it was, I can't remember how many warnings we gave them, but it was the idea of if you've passed that limit, it's gone until the end of the year. And we had a box of things that they came and collected in June. The hard part for that is, like you said, do whatever you want. The school could keep the phone, but then does he need the phone for other things? So it goes back to sometimes it's the parents' desire. They want to be able to get in touch with their kids whenever they can. And now with the apps where you can track your phone and other things. So, I have families that also have mixed feelings about how much to monitor on social media and how much to look at texts and emails and things like that. And I think, some families will say, you can't have a phone unless I have access to your passwords or other things like that. And if there's things that we find, it gets taken away from you. I do think sometimes if you have someone who's persistent, putting it somewhere else. Like I've had people take it to their work and lock up things at their work. So then even if they're looking, it's like, it's not in the house.
Yeah.
I do think that you are adding to some of that conflict then, because it's like, well, if I can't have my phone, I'm gonna make your life miserable, right? And so what do they get out of the phone? Is it games? Is it interaction? Is it escape? So we have to kind of look at what's the function of the behavior too. So the using the phone, if it's connecting with other people or their friends or knowing, what's going on. So certain kids, like with anxiety, they may want to know all the time, or they might have more of that obsessive quality. So if it's like, I need to play my game. And it's always hard for me because I feel like there's a lot of adults who play games or a lot of adults who do things on computers. And so I'll hear adults say, but I go to work and I get my job done and I do this. And so it's kind of like what you're saying, he's healthy, he's doing these other things, and so it's not at risk, but is it teaching him how to tolerate not having it? And so it goes back to kind of that idea of everything in moderation, right? And so taking trips where, there's no cell reception or doing things like that.
Yeah.
Or
the
letting
power
it die,
The
yeah.
power went out last weekend for like 14 hours, and he was really upset.
Right. But that goes back to, let's teach him how to be without a phone, right?
Yeah,
So do
well,
we play
problem solved.
cards?
He's like, let's go in your car and I can plug it in out there. And then our neighbors were too. We went out there and
Everybody's in their car.
Oh my God.
everyone's
Yes.
out their driveways charging their cars.
I can really relate to this story for one thing, so there's more of us in this room than you may think. I'm curious about your perception on, and I've heard through my son's therapists and teachers, we've had a lot of support for a lot of years, that, with puberty, sometimes it can reset the brain and things like executive functioning and behavior can improve. And I'm wondering.
Well, I'm like, it can also get worse,
Yeah,
yeah.
it might maybe get worse, but you end up coming out of it better than you went into it. And I'm wondering how valid, because I'm hanging on to anything
Right.
that might be hopeful.
So I'm just kind of chuckling because is it that it's improving, or is it that the other teens are starting to have the similar problems? And so they're more on the same playing field, right? So with teen years, you get more of those executive functioning problems. And then we have these high achieving teens who seem to be uber rigid, who have their schedule, who have things color coded, who are on top of it, but they're not able to relax. Do you know what I mean? So, and I'm not saying that organization like that is bad, but I think it's that I've got to do more, I've got to do more, I've got to do more. And if it's not perfect, then it's wrong. And so a lot of times it goes back to that kind of progress, not perfection. I repeatedly tell kids, nobody's perfect. And so it doesn't mean that we strive for mediocrity, but we look at it like, what's the size of this problem in comparison to other things? And for teens in this area, it really is achieving. And so if you're a kid who doesn't have that mindset, then you're actually creating an identity or peers that are in that mindset as well. And so then you've got this different cliques of people who are on one track and people who are on another track. And that's not something that's new. I mean, those are things that have been going on forever, but it seems to be that you can be a straight A student in extracurricular activities and still not be getting into colleges of your choice and competing with these other high-level people. And then this idea of your identity, of being a good student, of being somebody who's successful, and your peers being like, well, why didn't you get into that college, right? And it can be test scores, it can be other things, or it can just be that they're impacted. And so I really feel like that element is really challenging. As far as the executive functioning thing, I know lots of adults who have executive functioning issues. So about your brain resetting, I think that we are all managing more and more information all the time. So if you think about emails, if you think about phone calls, if you think about all of the things that we're inundated with all the time, we need strategies to manage that. And there's times we still forget it, right? Even with our reminders and our alarms and all of those things. So helping kids recognize, like, we're gonna forget things, there's a lot going on, and these are skills that will help you, and modeling it for them helps. But it is that thing, I can't tell you how many kids I have that do the work and don't turn it in. Or, you know.
Oh my God.
And so again, you know, we say, oh, let's work with the teachers of how to do it. But part of it is giving them that habit. I have kids set alarms on their phone. I have them set alarms on their watches. I have them put sticky notes. Like, when you get there, remember to turn it in. And think in terms of how you create a habit. So even executive functioning deficits, if you do something over and over and over again, it creates a habit. So we have to help create those healthy habits for them to help them be successful. So repetition is really something that can be extremely beneficial for our kids that have executive functioning issues. They're gonna be going nuts with you guys, but it's that idea of the bedtime, of the routines, of things like that. Yeah.
That part where do you just let them fail? Because it's that, you know, you do that helicoptering, right? And then, like my son's, I think I've been resistant of ADHD or whatnot. Finally, I just said, forget it. It's time because he's going to go to high school next year. And then, like, my daughter, who's totally opposite, like, doesn't study and brings the A's home and says, why don't I have a phone yet? You know, well, your brother didn't get it until, you know, 8th grade. And hers is a motivation issue, right? Because she's like, we spent so much time with him. And then I'm like, oh, you know, it's like a one child at a time.
Right.
But for him, I noticed that I'm hearing this, luckily he's okay with the phone. He's like, all right, just take it, right? Hers is like drama and the other things.
Right.
But I'm trying to struggle with that whole thing. You know, there's that fine line between executive functioning and the ADHD. But I think to a point where I finally said today, or like this past quarter on the grading, forget it. I'm not looking at school loop anymore because I'm going nuts, right? Of course, they're DD. It's like, because he's got 7 missing assignments. It's like, where happened?
So when you look at that and feel that way, how do you think he thinks when he looks?
Well, he goes, what happened? And then I'm like, well, I saw it in your binder, right? And then where'd it go? I don't know. Or then I've noticed he's lying. That's the big thing right now. He lies like right in front of the teacher, right? Because I finally said, all right, I have to have parent-teacher conference, right? Because I said, I'm trying to teach him, go on your own, you write your emails, even his emails are horrible. I'm like, oh, so I'm trying to rewrite his emails, but I'm trying to teach him, you gotta take responsibility. I cannot do this anymore. And he does, and I go, did you follow up? Yeah. And then I'm like, he did. And then the teacher said, he never showed up. I'm like, oh my God. Now I'm thinking, you're irresponsible. That's very rude to the teacher. They want to go home and then they're waiting for you and you're not there, right? So, but it's this whole thing, he's 8th grade, gonna start high school. I'm thinking, is it time for him to just fail? And then I said, should he just repeat 8th grade? And then I was like, oh no, that's not good, right? But I'm like,
And let's go back to this, that's the identity, right? So if I fail 8th grade and have to retake it, which sometimes we do have to repeat things, but where's my identity in that as a teen?
well, I know he said, I can't do that, I have to, different stuff. But it was sort of like, I think you just need another year, like to get routine again, right? But I think he's a little off spectrum, he talks a lot, the same thing, and he doesn't have that many friends and stuff, but
How does he get home each day?
he walks home
And
with his sister,
okay.
or they're aftercare, it depends on what she does.
Because those are the kind of things, again, if you can think of those routines, if you know you have something you have to do that day, if he gets somewhere and it's like, you can't get there until you do what you have to do, those kind of things help where there's contingencies, especially at more of that middle school age. But it's hard if you're not there to do that. And that's the other thing, I'm a realist, like people work, people have things going on, and so you can't walk your kid through every kind of thing, but it may take that initially of that kind of intensive, here's our routine, you're not going to aftercare, you're not going home, you have to go here first, and writing out the schedule and saying this, and it's like, what do you do next? And having teachers say, what do you do next? Until it becomes a habit. And that's the part that's hard because teachers don't always have time to do all that either, but if you have a good support network, and if he already has ADHD, does he have a 504 or an IEP?
He had an IEP, well, he has a vision issue, but he's got the IEP, and then we haven't, I finally went to doctor and said, okay, let's just try something to see if it works. He's only been on that medication for a month, and then we had vacation. So, I don't know if it's working, he says, oh, I feel I'm awake.
Yeah. No, and I think sometimes you see marked differences after medication, but it's not the magic pill. And that's true with anxiety, depression, with attention. It allows you.
This says, I think I have anxiety. I'm like, do you know what anxiety is? I don't know.
Anxiety is when you look at school loop and you've got all those missing assignments, right?
Well, that's me. I'm telling him.
Right.
He didn't look until after. Oh, what do you mean they're missing? I'm like,
So that's part of the routine, though, of every week we're going to look at school loop. And if there's something missing, let's look through your bind. And when I would work with kids on executive functioning things, I would make them sit down and I'm like, I'm not taking out your stuff, so let's take out your stuff. And then
tried it.
do you have a work to do and work completed folder?
He's got folders for each
So,
class.
so sometimes too many folders can be too much.
Okay.
Work to do, work completed. And so when I come home, I look at the work to do. Everything I need to do goes in that folder specifically. And when I'm done, I put it in the work completed. Teachers know that it's there. And if they can't necessarily like say, can I have your work, but saying, did you open up your work completed folder? So at the end of the day, if he has stuff in his work completed folder, he needs to make sure that's getting turned in. And then you email the teachers and say, can you ask him for the work completed folder? And so that way, at least it's in a concentrated place and you can see to do, done, right?
It's always these missing baskets,
Well, students that I worked with and their parents were on them about, if you're getting bad grades, you can't do other things. And it was always, I turned it in, but the teacher hasn't graded it yet. I turned it in and they lost it. And so again, but if you think, yeah. And sometimes those are true, but usually it's not. Yeah.
Back to what you were saying about the function of the behavior and how that might change what we do
Sure.
as a parent.
Sure. So I'm trying to think if I can think of a good teen example for this one, because I have really good ones for younger kids. So let me think of a teen one. So somatic complaints. I start to say, I don't feel good, and I have a test that day. What's likely the function of me not feeling good? What's it going to serve? So if I say I'm sick and don't want to go to school and I get out of the test, I successfully use that to avoid taking a test. When we successfully use something, whether it's intentional or unintentional, we're more likely to do it again in the future. And it's the same thing for parents, and I'm going to use you as an example, okay? So if you give your child the phone and he no longer complains, you've taken away an aversive because he stopped complaining. So you will be more likely to give him the phone in the future because it gets rid of the aversive. And that's just the way it is, and we've all done it. And there's times when I need to get something done, and I'm like, watch a movie, do this, with my daughter. Yeah, and part of it is I win, because I'm like, I gotta get something done, and I can't attend to you right now. But what message does that, I'm saying that out loud, like I've done that before. And it's because we're all so busy and having the time to do all of that. So part of it is teaching them tolerance to wait, teaching them patience, and where they are developmentally is gonna make a difference with that too. So we're all human. We all do things because it meets our need. And that's part of this idea, though, of a behavior chain. So usually there's an antecedent, and then there's a behavior that can be positive or negative behavior, and then there's an outcome, and then we look at the function based on that, okay? So there may be other factors, that can contribute to that, so it's not always cut and dry. One thing I think is really important that I want to go back to, when we looked at the stress model and we talk about the ABCs of behavior, if I say I'm not giving in because he'll get what they want, and then in that moment it's reinforcing the behavior, right? In the stress model, if we stick to that, what's going to end up happening?
Eventually it de-escalates.
No,
Before it goes up.
not always. Sometimes they up the ante, and sometimes it becomes unsafe, and sometimes we're getting more and more triggered too. So I'm sticking to my guns and saying, you're not getting your phone, and at some point, it shouldn't be about the phone, using distraction or something else or off topic, but it's more of, how do I calm my kid down now? Because they're up here and they're not problem solving, right? So I'm saying you're not getting your phone, and they're still stuck because they can't problem solve because they're escalated. So then it's saying, how do I not give you the phone, but how do I soothe you and comfort you? And even as teens, our kids need that. So they may not want it, and we have to think of other ways to do it. So whether it's rubbing their back or talking to them, but finding ways to get them back to baseline. And eventually we want them to self-soothe. And that's a tool that we want to start practicing really early on about self-care and so a lot of kids are like, I self-soothe by going online, right? Or by playing games.
Right, my daughter, she uses her, court mandated, by the way, so she knows it can't be taken away between the two households. Yeah, so that, try adding that into the layer of how I can manipulate you.
Right.
She uses her phone to stay in touch with her friends, but she has kind of coined that as a DBT skill. Well, Mom, I'm not, I'm doing this, I'm trying not to
Right.
relapse. She hasn't cut in however many months, but she's on the phone with her friend.
Right.
So there's this give and take, and I leave every one of these seminars feeling like, shit, I'm the one that needs the support. So that's my question right there is do you guys actually have parent support groups? Because I hear this
We do.
echoing where it's like, oh, yes, me too,
Yeah.
yes, me too, and I see that.
We have an ADHD parent support group, and I apologize, I don't know the exact day they meet, but I believe there's flyers up front if they're not back there. And it's been really successful. There was one for mood, and the person who led it ended up leaving. It's parent-led, and so that's the other part that's really nice. And people share their stories, and you're able to kind of say, like, I'm not alone in this.
Yeah.
If you go through ESPA, and it actually stands for, it's ESPA, it originally was for the early diagnosis of autism, but I have to tell you, I give every parent this resource because it's to help with any early diagnosis, but you don't have to have a diagnosis to use them. And they have a plethora of resources. So if you say, I'm looking for support groups, I'm looking for respite, I'm looking for therapy, they will give you a lot of resources.
Is that what Penn does too? Is it parent?
Penn does more community outreach and education. And so we recently joined with Penn, and so we've got a lot more resources as far as our community resources that have to do with parent ed and things like that, and it's great because most of them are free, so that's been really nice. And there's another one I was thinking of, Parents Helping Parents. If you haven't already used them, yeah, they're a great resource online. They have different events, work with IEP, special needs. Yeah.
So my struggle is with, I have a nearly 15-year-old daughter, and I find that her behavior with dad is kinder. He indulges her. I set the rules. I like to set the rules and sort of adhere to the rules more. She's more argumentative, rolling eyes, attitude, all of that, all of the teen stuff with me. So is it me? Am I sort of inviting the behavior because of my tone?
Because you're parenting her?
Because I'm parenting, or maybe it's my tone, maybe I'm expecting something and I'm already biased when I start a conversation with her. I'm not sure
Right.
what it is.
I definitely think tone and body language is important when we're frustrated with our kid or they're not listening to us or they're being disrespectful to us, but we're human, right? And so it's kind of checking your own self and knowing when you need to take a break or take deep breaths or any of those kinds of things. I would encourage you, and I'm sorry if I'm asking a personal question, but you said with her dad, you guys are married, you live in the
Yes,
same
yes,
house?
yes.
Okay, just wanted to make sure it wasn't separate households. Getting on the same page with dad is going to be
That's-
super important,
That is pretty hard.
right?
He says his thing is more laid back. It's okay. If they're not hurt or harmed, it's okay to let them be, let them do.
Right,
That's his thing. And my thing is no, we need to set limits.
right,
And yes, we give her more and more independence as she's older,
right.
but it's not sort of free for all.
Right.
As long as you survive, you're okay. It's not like that.
And how does he learn best? Does he like to read things? Does he like studies? Does he like,
So he's not. So he asked me many years ago to read a parenting book because I was losing. I was losing it, and I needed to.
right,
And he was the calm man
Right.
in the whole situation.
but did he
said,
read
"At
the
least-"
parenting book?
No. He
Okay.
said, at least I'm not harming. And I said,
Right.
well, not doing something is also harming.
Right.
But
And it also creates, it creates a division and triangulation
and
between the
kids
three
know
of
this,
you.
and the
Yeah.
kids can play off on that. I
So
see
even
that.
if he doesn't want to be active in the discipline as far as limit setting, knowing that he supports you, and if he can say, it's what mom says, if he's undermining what you say and saying things like, it's not that big a deal, or don't let it do it, then you just have to find your common ground, like what are and come up with 2 or 3. These are the things that we're going to agree on, and we're going to stick with together, and that if they challenge these rules, we're going to be on the same page with this. And even if he's deferring to you, but he says, I'm supporting mom, it lets them know they can't split you, and that'll help a lot. And then finding time to do things. I can't tell you how many times I'll say to a kid or a parent, when's the last time you did something fun with your parent? When's the last time you had joy? And they're like, oh. And when you're frustrated with your kid, that's really hard. With younger kids, I frequently will say, do a positive journal where you read different things about positive every night. Older kids, they don't want you to read to them. They don't want that kind of thing. But when you're sitting around and you can think of things that you're grateful for or positive, even if it's the smallest thing, take those opportunities to acknowledge that. And some people are like, I can't think of anything positive because we're always arguing. It's like they got up and went to school, or they took a shower, whatever it is, that those are the kinds of things that can be big progress in that way. And if you're reinforcing the things you want them to do, they're going to be more likely to do that. And if that feels good for them, they're going to be more. Some kids reject that. They're kind of like, why are you always telling me things? I'm not supposed to be doing that. But they still need to hear it. Okay? All right, any other? Yep.
But the kid says, let them fail. I feel that there's always two things. Maybe it's a wake-up call, or maybe they get used to the failure. I don't know, what should I do? I just let it fail? I'm just, maybe
Right.
there's a chance that, it's okay, I failed.
Well, and I'm going to ask you guys a different question. Did your parents let you fail?
Oh, yeah.
And how did they do that, and when did they do it?
Throughout life.
Right? Because if we're starting in our teen years and saying we're going to let you fail now, we haven't provided those opportunities, and am probably bad because I tend to be competitive. I grew up playing sports. My family played sports. So I'll play games with kids, and I don't let them win. But I play easier, I would say. But part of that is because I have kids that won't play, cards or chess, and they have big blow-ups when they don't win. And it's like, everybody wins and loses. It's not, and especially if it's something like I joke with younger kids, Candyland. It's chance. You're turning a card. Like if you went first or I went first is going to depend on who wins if there's only two of us playing. And so they're like, you're better at this. I'm like, I just turned the card. Like there isn't. So I think it depends on what they have to lose if they fail.
For example, for the grades, if I push my son, okay, he'll get a good one, but if I don't push him, maybe he
Is he
fails.
doing the best he can?
He's not organized.
Okay,
Like the other.
but being unorganized, is he doing the best he can?
No.
So if we feel like, again, skill level, if I don't have the skills, am I doing the best I can with the skills I have?
No, he says that, okay, I'm not organized. Even, we had, somebody to help him. Some people said, I'm not organized. I can't do anything. Yeah, this is me.
And I think sometimes that's too like the acceptance part and the identity. It's like, you don't like me how I am, you're trying to fix me. And we're seeing it as, I'm trying to help you. I'm trying to help you learn skills that are gonna make it better. But he has to feel the value in those skills, right?
But he doesn't feel the value. I don't know, what should I do?
What are his areas of interest?
Game, computer.
Okay, so if you can get analogies or metaphors that go with those things. So if you get a new game and you go in, right? Are you gonna be successful? Probably not, right? You're gonna die a bunch of times and figure it out. So what do our kids do to figure out games? They go online and they watch other people. Yeah, and so they figure it out. So if you can make analogies that are meaningful for them and help them see that by learning how to do it a different way, you're gonna be better at it. And so I really do try, even if we don't want them gaming, when they can make it relative to what is of interest to them, it can really help them make that connection. But I have so many kids that come to therapy and their parents are like, my kid needs to be fixed or my kid needs help. And the kids get here and they're like, my parents are making me come here.
They're the ones who
Yeah,
fix.
yeah.
He said he is okay.
And even if they do need the help, they're not gonna want my help because they don't wanna be there, right? And so we have to figure out a way to make learning, and think of that fixed mindset and growth mindset, and maybe even talk to him about that. Because if learning is something that feels like, I'm not good at this and I'm gonna fail, we have to help them understand that not failing completely, but not being the best at it is part of growing and learning and having better experiences. And that if you give up, then you're going to have a harder time facing those challenges in the future. Even with my daughter at a young age, she'll say, Mom, I need help, I can't do this. And I go, you have to at least try. I'm not gonna help you till you at least try. And as they get older, I think some of the kids don't want their parents to know they need help because it makes them feel bad. It's like, oh, I still, I don't need your help. I'm a teenager now, right? And then it becomes this thing, well, I don't care. Yeah. And if it's too much work, they're gonna give up. I give the example a lot with behavioral things. If I said to you, well, and this is a bad example because you guys probably don't want the money, but if I said I'm gonna give you $1,000 if you help me clean up, right? There's gonna be people that are like, okay, I'm in. And I'm like, okay, so we have to start at the corner of the building and we're gonna scrub all the windows outside and we're gonna go through the building and it's gonna take us probably 12 hours and we're gonna be here all night. Some of you might be like, I wanna go home, I'm not doing that, right? So if I say I'm giving you $1 to do that, you're gonna say it's not worth it, right? So for them, they have to find the value in it and it has to be worth their effort. So people who struggle more, it's more effort. And the little things that we think are easy are way more effort for them. So we have to figure out how to break it into manageable tasks and help them feel successful.
I think the problem, I think it's because we live in the valley. My kids do not understand the value of money.
Right.
Like I grew up with like, oh, we're lucky to get a 10-cent allowance a week.
The entitlement.
Yeah, you just go to Target and can you buy them something? I'm like, well, no,
Right.
And so, but now I'm trying to figure out how to say, earn whatever you want.
And it goes to that comparison theory again too, because even if your family has all the necessary means and you're establishing those kind of values for your child, and then they look at their friends who might not have those same, kind of hoops to jump through, then it's like, well, they just get it, they get that. And so there's always going to be that comparison, which is difficult.
Can you give me like a small example of the conversation that you might have setting these limits? Because I want to make my son part of this.
Right.
Problem staying up too late on the computer. I'd rather not take it away from him. I'd rather just, he needs to turn it off.
Right. So I like to do family meetings, but it's always weird if you've never done a family meeting, because then they're like, why are we meeting as a family? This is odd. So think in terms of when you have conversations that are good conversations, right? So if they're more relaxed at a certain time, that's going to be a better time to bring up subjects like this. It helps if it is seen as a collaborative thing, like, hey, I've noticed that we seem to be arguing a lot when, you know, it's time to turn off the computer. It doesn't make me feel good. Does it make you feel good? What do you think we should do? And he might say, let me play all night. And then you say, yeah, that's one solution. But I can't really do that because teenagers need their sleep and we need you to be rested. So what do you think is a fair time? So if he already knows there's a fair time, right, and he agrees on that, you're halfway there. So if he knows the time is 8 o'clock, then say, instead of taking it away from you, I'd rather you're responsible. So can we try for the week to see if when I come in, you turn it off? The other thing I would say is we frequently yell directions across rooms. Have you taken your bath yet? Have you taken your shower yet? Are you doing your homework? Instead of going face to face and having conversations. And so I would encourage, one, that we have more meaningful conversations face to face with people. And the other thing that I think we do a lot, and I remember hearing this example and I was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. If you were at school and a bell went off, usually at schools there's a whistle or a bell and it teaches you that it's time to transition. There's something else going on. Sometimes there's a warning bell and then the bell, right? If you think of yourself as a bell and you're giving a direction, go to bed, turn off the computer. If I do it over and over again, and I'm now the school bell, and it rings over and over again, does that kid know when to line up or when school's over or when to go to the next class? No, they don't know which bell to respond to. So we tend to give directions over and over again, and we do it too many times. So also,
Listen the first time.
right, but again, we've now created this pattern that they don't have to listen the first time because I'm going to repeat myself.
I keep telling that. So I did an example. I had to tell my son something, and I had my daughter watch it. And she goes, wow, Mom, you said it 10 times. You know, I'm like, it goes for you too.
Right.
So how many times should we say it? Probably twice, right? Because think even like if you're tuned out or something, but part of it is if I'm in the other room and I'm focused, when you're hyper-focused on something and someone talks to you, there's times we do the like, I'm sorry, I wasn't paying attention, right? And we have a developed brain, right? So it really is getting their attention and saying, this is your warning, doing kind of transitional things like with timers. As they get older, we want them to take responsibility for that. Set your timer. So we're not doing it for them, okay? But I think having the collaborative problem solving, and you can even say, this is a problem for me. I don't like us arguing at night. What's a problem for you? And he might say, not having this. And so maybe you even say, if you can close up your computer every night without me having to ask you and argue with you, and you can take the responsibility, on the weekend you can play longer or you can play more. Because the weekends aren't as important, right, as far as having to get up or have responsibilities. But you also don't want it to be like an all-night thing. You got to make it realistic in there. Okay.
Did you say it was at age 20 is when the...
Mid-20s, mid-20s. No, and that's why drug and alcohol is such a significant thing that teens don't have the brain development to recognize that. But if you can emphasize to your teens, drugs and alcohol impact your brain, and your brain is still developing. And so if you're using like your friends are now, it's going to impact how your brain is functioning, and your brain is still developing.
Why does it feel like, I thought my brain developed fine.
Well, that's because we're the adults now, right?
Well, I don't know, I just think the bones and computers.
Yeah. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming. I appreciate your input.